Kansas-Nebraska Act and Bleeding Kansas, várias Minzim. On January 4th of 1854, Stephen A. Douglas, wanting to ensure a northern transcontinental railroad route that would benefit his Illinois constituents, introduced a bill to organize the territory of Nebraska in order to bring the area under civil control. The Kansas-Nebraska Bill of 1854 repealed the Missouri Compromise due to the fact that the Kansas Territory was now open to the rule of popular sovereignty, allowing settlers of a territory to decide whether slavery would be allowed within a new state's border. Also, it divided the Nebraska Territory into two, Kansas and Nebraska. There was little chance of slavery taking hold in Nebraska, as the climate was too cold for the plantation agriculture. Yet, it seemed possible it might spread to Kansas. Douglas was confident that the people would vote for no slavery. As he was a supporter of Manifest Destiny, he did not want settlement of the West by sectional controversy. However, the bill became part of the political whirlwind of sectionalism and railroad building, splitting two major political parties and helping to create another, as well as worsening the North and South relations. Despite fierce opposition in the North by abolitionists such as Horace Greeley and William Lloyd Garrison, the bill passed on May 26 of 1854 and was quickly signed by the President Franklin Pierce. 90% of the Southern congressmen voted for it. 64% of Northerners voted against it. Northern Democrats splintered. 44 in the House voted for it. 43 voted against. The appeal of the Independent Democrats, signed by such free soilers as Salmon P. Chase and Charles Sumner, and published in many Northern newspapers, attacked Pierce, Douglas, and their supporters for breaking a sacred compact by repealing the Missouri Compromise. Arguments between the Democratic Party, who supported popular sovereignty and states' rights, and their opposition, the Whigs, heated up and had lasting effects leading up to the outbreak of the Civil War. Before the vote on slavery, Northerners crossed the border to keep Kansas a free state. On the other hand, Southerners crossed the border to keep Kansas as a slave state. Consequently, both sides ended up claiming victory on the votes. When Kansas applied to join the Union, the people in the territory were allowed to decide whether slavery would be legal or not. Pro-slavery groups rushed supporters into Kansas from Missouri to vote for pro-slavery legislatures. These pro-slavery legislatures then passed laws making it a crime to question slavery or help fugitive slaves. Anti-slavery Kansas formed their own legislature. The pro-slavery legislature charged their leaders with treason and then tried to arrest them in the town of Lawrence. The leaders fled, but the pro-slavery force decided to attack the town, killing one man and destroying much property. Anti-slavery Kansas responded by acting and killing pro-slavery groups. The violence, which cost around 600 lives, became known as Bleeding Kansas. The anti-slavery settlers became known as Jayhawkers, and the many pro-slavery forces that crossed over from Missouri became known as Border Ruffians. Hostilities between bands seemed imminent in the late 1855 as well. Over 1,000 Missourians crossed the border and Lawrence, a free state stronghold. On May of 1856, a pro-slavery posse trying to arrest free leaders sacked the town of Lawrence, burning some buildings down. Northern journalists reported and exaggerated that dozens of free staters were killed in the attack. In reality, there were no fatalities, except one man who died when a building collapsed on him. In response, the abolitionist John Brown led anti-slavery fighters to murder 5 pro-slavery settlers along Pottawatomie Creek. Northern newspapers suppressed the facts, claiming that Brown had acted as self-defense. Overnight, he became a Northern hero. In Kansas, his actions led to increased tension and a series of killings. Once more, the Northern press exaggerated the situation, describing it as a civil war. Small armies ranged over eastern Kansas, clashing at Blackjack, Franklin, Fort Saunders, Hickory Point, Slough Creek, and Osawatomie, where Brown and 40 others were routed in late August. Bleeding Kansas became a rallying cry for Northerners opposed to what they perceived to be slave power at work. The turmoil in Kansas continued when President James Buchanan appointed a new territorial government and asked him to have the citizens adopt a constitution and apply for statehood. While many free soilers lived in Kansas by this time, most boycotted the Constitutional Convention, held in the temporary capital in Lecompton. Voters had a choice between a constitution that allowed slavery and maintained increase of the institution, or a constitution that banned the import of new slaves, but allowed for generational increases in the number of slaves. Eventually, the voters in Kansas rejected the Lecompton Constitution, and an irreparable split in the Democratic Party developed. The conflict over elections resulted in two separate governments operating inside of Kansas, a pro-slavery one and an anti-slavery one. In 1859, a single constitution was finally adopted. The fear and animosity that had fed violence in Kansas and Missouri continued and impacted how the Civil War was fought on the Missouri-Kansas border. In addition, the atmosphere in Kansas and the media's portrayal spurred tensions nationally and was one of the events that helped to bring on the Civil War. Bleeding Kansas can be seen as a foreshadowing of the Civil War. A historian known as Alice Nichols wrote, "Kansas had a twin, and its twin was the Civil War."